Welcome to the Chasing Brighter podcast, a show about self-discovery and lifestyle tips for moms. We are your hosts. I'm Kelly, a wife, mom of two, and an independent consultant with my own company in Chicago.
And I'm Jessica, a wife, mom of three, and owner of my own outpatient mental health practice in Nevada. You're about to go on a journey of self-discovery as we chase a brighter you. Every single week, we will bring you new episodes that will cover everything from lifestyle and tips to more serious conversations about grief, life, and hardships.
Whether it's a duo episode or we have a guest, you are guaranteed to pick up a new tool or feel less alone. This one is for the moms that have forgotten how to make time to keep their spark alive. Allow this show to be a reminder to always keep chasing a brighter version of you. Let's get into it.
Today, we're so excited to have Braxton Storm, LCSW, join us today. Braxton is a husband and father of two with another one on the way. He's a licensed clinical social worker. Braxton owns his own private practice, Calm the Storm LLC. Through his practice, he has found that effective treatment for children includes coupling interventions with parents. Braxton has established an 8-week parenting course based on research by Dr. Dan Siegel and his book, The Whole Brain Child. In addition to his professional experience, Braxton grew up within the foster care and relative placement systems, which led to being adopted at the age of 9 by his aunt and uncle. This experience has created a passion that Braxton has in empowering children and parents or caregivers to make meaningful connections and thrive in their relationships. So, Kelly, I was so excited to have Braxton on today. What do you think?
I was really interested in just learning about the whole brain child philosophy. I've seen the book for years. I know it's been out for a long time, but I've never picked it up and read it. So
Yeah.
I was really interested in what he shared with us, especially when we talked about parenting classes. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I this is why I love social workers, because I do feel like social workers see a need and fill a need. And so Braxton starts his practice, he's working with kids, and then it's not just the kids, but the parents need tools. And I think sometimes, what are your thoughts on, I don't know, this is my experience, I think, as a therapist. People come in and they're like, I specialize in anxiety and trauma. And they're like, this is freaking out. I feel out of control. My life is so difficult. And the solution is actually simple. And people sometimes don't want to hear that or don't want to do that because I think we want it to be this overly complicated, difficult thing, but it's actually simple.
Yeah, I think you're right. In general, life is not supposed to be hard, and I think we definitely make it more difficult. And I think parenting is a great example of that. If you're not in a good headspace and you're in a situation, you make it a heck of a lot harder to resolve the situation rather than if you had a clear head. I think talking to Braxton's was really awesome in just a lot of the tools and tips he shared and just thinking about how us as parents can use the whole brain child framework to be better parents. That's part of us with Chasing Brighter
Yeah.
is like our journey of self-discovery and how we can be our, best and brightest selves, and parenting and being a great parent, I think comes into that too.
Yeah. And I think that's what Braxton focused on, is that the work begins with us. It's our
Mhm.
internal work. If we want to be a great parent, we have to be a great human, right? And care for ourselves and take care of ourselves. And ultimately, connection with our child is what is going to help us through the teen years.
And I think what is really fascinating about what you just said, and I was thinking about it before you said it, which was connection, and how
Yeah.
connection is the lifeblood of kind of self fulfillment and happiness. And it's interesting that here's this book, and it really comes down to that too, is having that connection with your child in those moments.
Okay. I can make everything go back to the book, The Four Agreements. I
Hmm.
feel like you and I can make also everything go back to that book, The Good
The
Life,
good life, I know.
because they're like, what's the key to human happiness? Connection. right? Like healthy connection is the key. And what's great is that we can grow and evolve and change as humans. And let's say we messed up. Let's say we were like working a lot when our kids were little. We really struggled. It was very difficult for us when they were little, and we didn't do our best to make a connection. That doesn't mean that there's not an opportunity to begin to grow and create connection now. It may
Mhm.
be a little more difficult, but it's possible. It's possible to create a connection with your child at any time.
And I think it's to that point, you hear of parents who are like or dads who are like, I'll be with the kid when they get older, when they can catch a football or whatever it is, right? Your connection with your child maybe evolves and changes over time too,
Yeah.
just depending on which phase. And also the personalities start to come out more and more as they get older. And so your relationships evolve and that connection might change too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because your kids are gonna have different needs at different times, right? There's a time where, like, you're their only source of survival, like, you give them food, you give them water, and then when they can start doing that for themselves, their need for you is going to change. So, um, I loved this interview. I thought Braxton was awesome. I'm so excited for you guys to hear what he has to say, hearing his story, hearing his journey, and hearing how we can use the whole brain child to parent our teens.
So here is our interview with Braxton Storm, LCSW.
Welcome, Braxton. We're so excited to have you today. This is so awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
One of the reasons we're so excited to have you today is Kelly and I are having teenagers take over our household. And we have found that it's different. It's different. A teen is different than a younger child in many ways. And we're trying to navigate it. And I love that you were out there, that you created a parenting course and that you were helping parents navigate parenting. And I love through the lens of the whole brain child, which we'll get to. Just looking back through your life, how do you think you got to this moment? What led you to becoming a therapist and starting your own practice?
Yeah, great question. It's hard to pinpoint maybe one particular thing, but I think it's been a journey, right? I was in foster care as a youth, right? A little kid. And it's actually funny I found out later in my court reports in talking to case managers, one of the things I was quoted saying was that I hate social workers. And it turns out that's what I am now, right?
Aw.
So it was funny, right? Ironic that's the case. But I think there's always been a drive within me to give back and make something of my story for whatever reason. I don't know necessarily that I think that's just who I am, but not saying that everyone that has gone through what I've gone through has to do this, but that's been my story. I never thought, so I got into social work. I did a lot of different things and I never thought I'd be a therapist. And then one day a mentor said, you know what, just sit in on the session, right? Just see what I do. And after that, I was like, you know what? I think that's what I'm going to do. So that's in a broad sense what's got me to this point overall.
Do you think hearing that quote that you didn't really remember, do you think it was just because it was blaming the social worker for changing your living situation or
As a little kid, knew intuitively that there were some issues at home and different things, but the social workers like that target that you can place blame. I'm not going to blame my parents, right? Regardless of what they're doing, I'm going to blame someone that's taking me away from them,
Yeah.
regardless of how safe or unsafe the situation was. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
definitely.
worked with abused and neglected kids for quite a few years in group homes in California, and I've always told people it's astounding. Kids always want back with mom and dad. Always. Draw a picture. Mom and dad does not matter what mom and dad have done to them, whether mom and dad are together or not. That's kids' desire. And so reflecting on what you're saying of those of feelings of yeah, you want to be with your parents. But that's incredible. You were in the foster care system for a little bit and then you were adopted?
Yeah, from the age of 3 until I was 10, I was in and out of different situations. I was in foster care for a length of time, just one time, and then relative placement. So I was with my grandma, and then I went with my aunt and uncle, and then back with my mom. And in California, after a parent gets their child taken away 3 times, at least back in the 90s, they get their parental rights taken away. There's no fourth chance. And so that's what occurred in my situation. After the third time, I had to go somewhere, and my aunt and uncle stepped up and said, we'll take them in. They had cousins, they had kids that were my cousins, same age as me. It was a good fit.
Yeah. And then you went on to school. And so I know you said you did all kinds of things, but what type of things have you done in the social work field or as a therapist?
Yeah. So I started off working in skilled nursing. I guess I should back up. I did some internships in foster care parental recruitment. So I did that first.
Mm,
I love that. That was really cool. Lots of pop ups and events and more community social work, right?
mm.
That was really awesome and then some training too, which was great. And maybe that's probably a precursor to where I'm at now, working with a lot of parents. But so I did that, and then I moved to Vegas and I started working in skilled nursing. That was my first official social work job. I found out very quick that that wasn't where I wanted to be. Just wasn't a great fit. So I moved into my master's program and I worked at Safe Nest, which is the domestic violence agency here in town. And that's where I found my mentor, who I actually share offices with now, ironically.
Hmm.
And she pushed me into therapy. So that was really cool. I did a lot of domestic violence groups and worked with perpetrators and victims of domestic violence and a lot of community advocacy, different things like that, which was great. And then I started my clinical internship here in town with an agency who specializes in children and adolescent foster care youth and adoptive youth. So I did 2.5, 3. I'm still there a little bit on the side, but I work with that population. And then just last year, I started my private practice. This is the beginning of that journey, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I am like a social worker through and through. I think
Yeah.
that an MSW is like the best degree ever. And what you're talking about is such an example of why it's so versatile. You can do
Very
so
broad,
many
yeah.
things. And like you, I went in my program, it was micro practice and macro practice, and micro was therapy. And I was like, oh, I'm going to run a nonprofit. I did macro the
Yeah.
whole time. And then I was like, finished my degree. And then I was like, never mind. I'm going to be a therapist. And I have another friend did same thing. Like several of us studied macro management, and then I have friends doing all kinds of things. And so I think it's so diverse because as you go through the life cycle, Kelly and I are in our 40s. Like you have to pick what you want to do at 18 and then you're stuck doing that forever.
Right.
And so I think you could do so many cool things with it. You're just
And perhaps we're
reinforcing.
biased, right? But
Yeah.
the social work field is so broad, right? Like
Yeah.
I could go out and we could do a nonprofit or whatever just based on
Mhm.
our educational background. But yeah, there's so many options. It's awesome.
Yeah. And so Kelly and I were not so familiar with the whole brainchild until I started stalking you on the internet. And
So we didn't find anything too bad.
no, all good. We didn't talk about this yet, but you have the best name ever. Braxton Storm is like the best name ever. And your practice, Calm the Storm. I just feel, wow, you hit the
Yes.
jackpot with this
It's
I
wonderful
know.
perfect
name.
as a
And
therapist, yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
great. So good. So we haven't read the whole brainchild yet, but now obviously I've told you it's on our queue. I would love to hear about the book and then what about it inspired you to then create parenting classes.
Yeah, great question. So when I started working with these foster and adoptive youth 3 or 4 years ago, I realized pretty quick that the youth would only progress as far as the parents were, right? That analogy of like you can't pick someone up unless you're higher than them, right? And the parents oftentimes were not. They were in a puddle of mud, so to speak, as well. And they were stuck. And so I teach these kids these skills. They go home and have an adverse reaction. To those skills that were being taught because the parents weren't validating the progress, right? So they come back and it was just a continuous cycle of, okay, here's some skills. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. And I got tired, to be honest, of running in circles. And so I just tried to broaden my horizons a bit and reach beyond the child. And obviously what I found was that parents and parental involvement, which perhaps I should have known. Maybe I did know that based on my background, but I just started to realize that the parental involvement in the therapeutic process is crucial, right? There's lots of therapists that might have different opinions, right? But I think I've seen most success when the parents are held accountable in the therapeutic process and they're given homework and skills and techniques and processing within that session as well.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I worked with adolescents for a long time. And when I worked with kids in the foster care system, the parents were on a plan. So they had to do everything I suggested. So I thought I was like this great therapist. And then when I went into the private sector, parents are like, something's wrong with my kid, take care of my kid, see you later. So you're like seeing the kid 1 hour a week, but the family system isn't changing. And so it's like, how can you make change when they're being thrown right back in and to
Mhm.
something different? And so then I would change my spiel about, okay, if you're bringing your child to therapy, it's like what you're talking about. This is a whole program, right? This is a whole, we all need to make changes. It's not just like me fixing your kid, but that absolutely was totally my experience as well.
How do you
Yeah.
for both of you guys and I even liking it to, like, my husband and I were in couples therapy, but we only were in couples therapy because he went to therapy himself, and then I think, again, same thing, right? It's about these relationships, right? Where you can only do so much one-sided in some way if you do wanna try to improve the situation. So, in my case, like, I didn't wanna go to therapy, right? So he dragged me kicking and screaming at the time, and it ultimately was great and definitely life-changing. I probably wouldn't have this Chasing Brighter podcast otherwise, but I guess my question for you guys is, like, how do you draw or even for you, Braxton, like, how do you draw that parent in when they were, like, thinking you guys were gonna fix them without them? How do you help? 'Cause people don't wanna face, right? I don't wanna face the things that I'm not good at or the things I'm not that are sad or whatever. So, how do you draw them into a conversation?
That's so I actually maybe perhaps my practice is unique or the way that I operate is unique. But when parents call me, I just had a conversation with a parent last week and she called me and said, "Hey, this is my child. Here's the problem." Right. And I said, "That's great. I'll see you and your husband for a session." She's like, "Wait,
Mhm.
what?" I thought I was just going to bring my son in. And I said, "No, I'm going to meet with you and your husband. I want to make sure that what you're doing as a parent, you feel validated, you feel important, you have the skills that you need so that I can make it an effective treatment." She was
Wow.
very caught off guard, but her and her husband came in and throughout our conversation, I talked about the whole brain child principles and different things. And what we found is that they had no parenting structure. They had never once talked about how they wanted to parent. And so they're bringing
Yeah.
their child in and saying, "My child doesn't talk to us." Yeah. But have you guys ever thought about what you need to do as parents? Or are you just leaning on generational patterns
Mhm.
and hoping that it works out? And oftentimes, for good or for bad, I think that's what we do as parents, right? It, like you said, it's hard to face the idea that we need to change, as it is for everyone. It just so happens that with parents, it impacts their children quite a bit.
Yeah, that's great. How'd you think of that spiel? Did you write that? Did you have to create a script for yourself or is that just natural?
Yeah, that's what I do. And then also, I've been toying with the idea. I've had mixed reviews. I actually, in some cases, require them to get the whole brainchild workbook.
Mm.
So before treatment starts, because as we'll talk about, I'm sure this workbook is tailored towards the parents and what makes them parent the way they do. And so I invite them to get that workbook, and then I spend a good 30 minutes a week talking to them throughout the session. So I spend very little time with the child at first, and spend a lot of time with the parent, like processing each worksheet and seeing where they're at.
So let's dive into that. Let's talk about the whole brain child. Maybe just a quick high level for anyone who's never heard of it in terms of how it can help parents.
Yeah, it's important to differentiate. There's a book called the Whole Brain Child Book, and
Mhm.
it's a blue book, a smaller book, and then there's a red handbook or a workbook. The book itself, the blue one, is for parents to help parent their children. So it gives them skills of how to relate to their child. Now, the workbook does the same thing, but it instead of just doing that, it enables the parent to reflect back on their own parenting, where they got it from, where did they get these skills from? Do they yell? Do they scream? Do they do timeouts? Why do they do those things? It's probably because they were given those things as children. It just helps that it's a much more reflective process doing the workbook for parents as opposed to the book. So um, now what does that workbook do? It teaches some different skills too. So it'll say, it might ask a question like, what do you do when you're triggered as a parent, right? Your child does something and it elicits a response within you. What's your reaction when that occurs? And a parent might say, like I said, I throw them in the timeout, or I spank them, or I yell, or I whatever. And then it teaches them skills. And those are the same skills in both books. The first one, which is really what I try to hone in on, is connection over correction, which it does not go well with parents. Right. You tell that to a parent, typically dads, right? To be honest, it's really hard for males, I think, overall to relate to this. But when you invite someone to connect, right, a parent to connect with their child in the heat of the moment instead of correct them, which is our natural tendency, it's really awkward and really hard for us to do that as parents. That's the first skill. Second one's name it to tame it, right? When a child is feeling something, they obviously most of the time don't have the words. So they might hit something or scream or kick or whatever, right? I have little kids and they do that. So it's our job as parents to teach them what they're actually feeling instead of just labeling them as a bad child or unproductive or hot headed, right? They're feeling emotions, and that's what all of us feel. Third one is engage, don't enrage. Pretty self explanatory, but meet them at eye level, speak with a calm voice, try to help them understand that what they're feeling is normal and that you get it as a fellow human being working on progress. Move it or lose it as number four. That just means get active, right? Do something. Don't just stay there. It's okay to go through that process and then act, do something to change your environment. And number five is SIFT, which stands for sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. So that's where we get narration, which is often hard for parents to do too, but it's really effective, especially with littler kids, to narrate, especially between siblings. Like, oh, Johnny, it looks like your eyes are watering, right? I wonder what's going on inside for you, or your fist are clenched, or you're about to hit your sister, right? You kind of narrate the story and it catches them off guard, like, oh, that's what I'm doing. And it helps them to understand from an outsider's perspective, oh, this is something that I can change. Right? It's not just something that completely overwhelms me. There's things that I can do to alleviate this.
That's
Does that
so
make sense?
good. My youngest is very difficult, and I know it's because I have 3 kids. He's the
Hmm.
3rd, so I have less for him than I did for the other 2, and he's been saying a lot. He'll say, "You're a mean mom. You're a mean mom." "Well, what did I do?" "You yelled at me." "Okay, let's talk about what happened." And I'll say, I was really frustrated," and he doesn't have a recollection of anything that he was doing. So it would be like, "Okay, we're having" like yesterday, "We're having tutoring in the car." "Okay, but I got you a snack in the car. We have a snack. Your tummy's full. We're gonna go home. We have tutoring with Maxwell. I really would like for you to work with him. It's not kind when you hide under the table and refuse to work with him or whatever, right?" And then we get in the house, runs under the table and
Yeah.
refuses to follow directions. So I'm imagining that right now to be like, wow, okay, so you're hiding under the table. Maxwell's asked you to come over and you're just hiding there and you're not responding to him. Cause he really, it's like when he goes through it in his mind, he's everybody's mean. I'm being yelled at. And he doesn't realize like his actions. So I'm loving that. I'm trying to like give examples, right? On when we could be doing that. So I love that for my youngest.
Jessica, if you were to use that example you just described, right? So the first principle, connection over correction. Oftentimes as parents, we don't want to know why. We don't want to know why you're hiding under the table.
Yeah,
We
just
just don't
do
want
what
you
I
to hide
say.
under the
Just
table.
do what
Yeah,
I say.
just sit down because
Yeah,
we have something, we're embarrassed, we're paying money,
yeah,
there's an investment, and we care more about that appearance oftentimes, whether we recognize it or not. We
yeah,
just want them to do it. We don't care about why. So maybe asking your son, why do you hide under the table?
yeah,
What is so difficult about this scenario, right? What you're going to find is that you as an individual have often run into this as well. And so then you can say, you know what? I relate to that. So what can we do as parents to help you, or what can we do as a team to help this experience go better? Do we need to do tutoring on the floor? Do we need to do it outside? Do we need to go to a park or do something else? That's problem solving. We're teaching them that problems don't have to overwhelm us, that there's always a solution. Right.
I think so many times our cup is empty, right? And this is
Yeah.
what I was telling him. So last week we did this tutoring situation and I was like, "Oh," I had some energy. I was like, "Let's get a paper out. What would you like tutoring to do? What would you like to do with Maxwell? Okay, let's write that down. Okay, you wanna do math? Great, okay. And what else do you wanna do? Wonderful, okay." There, because I had the energy, right? I was and then, but, like, when we
Yeah.
don't, right? And it's because I know it's coming from us. I know it's when we're trying to connect, and so I would give an example if I said, "Let's connect." "Okay, why are you hiding the table?" "I don't wanna do tutoring. I hate tutoring. I don't wanna do it." "Okay, what do you suggest?" "I wanna do it with you. I want you to work with me." "Okay." We did that, and you ran up in your room, and you hid, and you didn't listen, and and I got really frustrated.
That's
It's
that
like,
part, right? That's that
yeah,
part that's really important.
yeah,
And
it's
then,
tough.
and so then as a parent, our bowl is empty or whatever, our bucket's empty, and we get frustrated. And then we say, I'm not going to take responsibility. I'll just have someone else come in, right?
Yeah,
Maybe that's the right answer.
yeah,
But we see through the research that children's success or adolescent success in a variety of different areas, right? Socially, academically, otherwise, is directly connected or correlated with parental involvement and parental connection. I was
yeah,
just reading a study in preparation for this, and the research shows it, right? But as parents, I don't think we're, for a lot of different reasons, it's hard for us to know what to do. And so I think that's
Absolutely.
the main purpose of my group and the way that I run my practice is
yeah,
to give parents those skills.
I love it too because there are a lot of books, a lot of parenting books out there, right? You can find a bazillion different things, but I think the hardest part is putting it into practice and having a coach in some way is somebody who can help you navigate that as a parent because anything is developing this new path, these new pathways. And it seems overwhelming to put things into practice unless you actually practice. And I feel like that, even as myself and a parent, is the hardest part is just you read something like, "Oh, I'm gonna try that," and you try it and it works, and then you still go back to the old way very easily versus working with you where there's this regular check-in too. There's a little bit of accountability. Is that part of that, you think?
Yeah, I always try to describe this to parents that this isn't a sprint, right? It's not going to change just because you did it for a week or you did it for 2 weeks, right? This is a patternized behavior that you're trying to, or lifestyle rather, that you're trying to create, right? And if a child comes in who's 10 and the parents say, well, he's just always been a difficult child, or she's always been whiny or hard or difficult. I always ask them, how long did it take you to get here? The child's 10 and you've been doing the same thing for 10 years. So to expect this to change within a couple months or a week or so, it's unrealistic. So it's very typical for parents to start, and I've seen this in my practice. Parents will start, they'll get discouraged. My words or my suggestions aren't enough for them because they just want the problem to be solved right now. And so what we'll find is that they'll stop and then they'll come back, right? And then they'll stop and then they'll come back, unfortunately. But that's very typical.
yeah. It's hard. Growth can and change can be hard. And you were saying we left you off at 5,
Mhm.
right? Like movement.
So sift. So number 5 is sift. So that is the last one, which is
Oh,
sensations, images,
oh,
feelings, and
okay, okay.
thoughts. A lot of that workbook is focused on helping the parents understand why they parent the way they do. And the skills are just there as well, but not the primary focus.
I have found the entire time I've been a parent, like we were giving the tutoring example, like much of the strife, I don't know if that's either of yours experience, is when you need to do something. So if we're chilling at the house, we don't have a lot happening, there's not any pressure. And but it's like when I'm trying to get something done for myself and trying
Yeah.
to accomplish a task for myself is when there have been struggles because they're
It's
another
hard to give
human.
them
They're a
it's
whole
hard to give them
individual with
that.
their own agenda.
Yeah, you're trying to like you can't give 2 things attention at the same time.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
the hard part.
Yeah. And when we move through the life cycle and we get to the teens are beginning to individuate. They want to, I think about it so much like a toddler. I remember reading a book and they said a toddler will have a tantrum because they want to go through the door and leave you, but they're screaming at the same time because they left you. And I feel like that's my experience with teens, right? Is they want to be left alone and they want to go do their own thing, but they also want you there as
Hmm.
well as they're growing. So, how do you think we could use the whole brain child approach with a teen?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Like I said, I use this across the children's lifespan. So it's not just, I think the book is
Mhm.
more tailored towards younger children, but I use it with teenagers often. And really, like you just said, you nailed it on the head. Teenagers want to be autonomous, right? They want to be able to choose for themselves what they want to do. And us as parents, like you guys were saying at the beginning, right? Lawnmower parents, we don't want them to feel pain, right? We don't want them to mess up. We don't want them to have their own experience unless it's tailored to alleviating our stress as parents, right? So if we get triggered by them making bad choices, we don't want them to make bad choices. So we fight against it, right? We don't want that to happen. I think one of the most important things kind of ties back to what we were talking about before. But when they become teenagers, we can't forget that they had 12 years before that. And what did we do with that 12 years, right? It's not like you just, sometimes you have to start when they're teenagers and build that connection again, especially if we haven't put in the work before. But children across the lifespan want to be heard. They want to be seen. They want to be valued. That's the definition of connection that I use. And so making time to ensure that those teenagers know that they're loved despite the choices they want to make, helping them learn skills to make choices that are in accordance with their morals or their values, right? Instead of rules are important. I like to suggest to parents that they use principles. So, hey, you're hanging out with so and she's doing drugs, right? Or she is sneaking out. Did that feel right to you as a child, right? As a teenager, as a person, is that something that falls in line with what you want to do? It's just fun, right? Or you just never let me do anything. Okay. So what can I do as a parent to help you to feel like you can make your own decisions? And what can you do as a teenager to make decisions that are in line with what you value, right? So you take that problem solving approach instead of just saying, you're not hanging out with someone, because eventually we know that they're going to hang out with so and so, right? The rules only go so far, whether they do so when they're 18 or they sneak out, right? Or they tell you they're somewhere and they're not, right? They're going to do what they want to do. But if you can pause the situation and help them reflect on if they're behaving in a way that is in line with what they believe to be right, that's what I found to be most successful. Does that make sense? That's a very it's
Yes.
Yes.
easier to say than it is to do thing, right? But that's where like the consistent parenting day after day, right? That's what we signed up for as
Yeah.
parents. But
Yeah.
oftentimes we don't like the contract, right? We say, hey, can I modify some things? Can I just let them be by themselves? Can they just follow my rules? But we're really trying to set them up for independence and success long term, right? This isn't just an 18-year thing. They have a lot of life to live.
I think that's great. No, I see that my 13-year-old is very much trying to be independent and make his own choices. And I think that's what Jesse talked about is almost we see this there's a switch in parenting where before you could rule the roost and have all these rules, but now they're pushing against you. And we know that they have to be on their own and be self sufficient, be adults and have a job someday. And it's making that transition and figuring out how to let them feel good about making their own choices and us feel confident they're going to make the choice that is going to keep them A, happy, but B, safe and cared for.
Yeah, kids
Yeah.
want to be trusted, right? Teenagers want to know that their parents see them as someone that can make the right choice, right?
Yes.
Even when they make mistakes, right? So then they come back. The key is that they come back, right? They make a mistake, they sneak out, they do whatever, and they say, you know what, mom or dad, I made a mistake. I can imagine as parents of teenagers, that's probably the most validating experience, right? Is when they come back and say, you know what, I tried to do my best and it didn't work out. Can you help? That's what we're
Yeah.
aiming for.
Mhm.
Right?
And where I and we I've talked about this before in the podcast where I say I have multiple personalities. I am a clinician. I used to work in crisis intervention. So I have the skills and ability to talk to them and say, "How do you feel?" and let's talk about that or where's that coming from? But then there's like the reactionary part of me where I want to give like speeches and we had a talk on the podcast earlier this week where my daughter and her friend thought it was like super smart to get on a boat with these guys that they met because they met them for 2 hours. So they know them, they're
Clearly,
friends.
great choice.
And my
Yes.
friend that was there with them was, like, hysterical. The mother that was there were obviously they were kidnapped into the sex trafficking. They're being sex trafficked and or they've been murdered already. And it was like, I think as a parent too, when we talk about we want them to say I was wrong or whatever, it was like the struggle in that scenario was like the girls only focusing on that we were overreacting. And when I look at what you're saying, the way we really wanted to press upon them how serious the situation was.
You want to teach
instead
them,
of
right?
asking the questions, instead of just stopping and saying, okay, what was your thought process there? Oh, they were your friends. What kind of went on that had you thinking, oh, now we're friends? And just
100%.
keep asking questions. And I studied motivational interviewing for a long time to ask questions in a way to get them to realize it themselves. But instead, I'm like, what the hell were you thinking? Are you serious? You
100%.
seriously jumped on a boat? Is this happening? And so
Yeah.
definitely flew out of my brain all of the ways. And I love hearing this. And the more we do it, the more we reinforce it and talk about it, the better we can become as parents to stop ourselves from reacting. Because like you're
Yeah.
saying, the workbook is about us working through our shit. Like we have
Yeah.
triggers, we have stuff, I worked with sex trafficked teens. That's going to be something I'm worried about. And so it's like recognizing with so many things in our lives, recognizing our triggers, self-soothing, taking a break, calming myself down so I can be present and ask them these questions, because you're right. Our goal is to have a self-sufficient human, and they're not going to be self-sufficient if I'm dictating their life and not allowing them to make
Right.
their own mistakes, because that's how we learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I was just in a conference this past week and they were talking about teenagers. And it gave a generational difference between us as parents and what our kids need. And so one of them was, as parents, we often want to teach them, right? We want to give them all the information, all the wisdom
Yes.
that we have. Unfortunately, what we fail to realize is that all of our children have these devices, right? They can look up, they know that there's children being sex trafficked, right? They know the severity of it. They can look up anything, right? And so children don't need information from us anymore, which is a difference from when we were
Mhm.
children, right? We needed information because we didn't have access to it. Our children don't. What they need is connection, right? They need to know, like you were saying, asking them questions, right? Leading them, I like to say, leading them to the trough, right? And then they'll drink, right? So leading them down the path where they need to go. And that's what I find to be most effective.
This is hard. This parenting
Yeah.
gig, I signed up for
Rough.
a lifetime of this.
I know.
I don't think I was fully informed.
But
I
Jesse, it can be very rewarding.
No. Well,
That's what they say.
I remember when I had my oldest and someone said, I don't know if I read it, and they said having a child is like having your heart outside your body. And that resonates with me so much. I know I'm incredibly fortunate. All three of my children were planned, and came to this world planned into a loving home. And it's like having your heart outside your body. And that's why I don't want them to experience pain, because then all experience pain, and that
Yeah. Yeah.
you want them to have this loving little bubble life, because it's hard to
To be
watch.
happy forever.
Yeah,
Yes.
but obviously, like, my mistakes have made me who I am, and it makes you
Yeah.
stronger and wiser, and
Yeah.
but it's difficult. Yeah, so I
Resilience,
love that
Jess.
connection piece, you
Yes.
know?
Yeah. Maybe it's less about preventing the pain and instead providing a space that they can come when they feel pain. Right.
Yeah. And you won't know your own resilience if you hadn't been exposed even to many traumas. I love the book. Braxton, did you listen to the book What Happened to You by
Yes.
Oprah
Yep.
Winfrey? Oh my gosh, so
I have it on my
good.
bookshelf. Yeah.
So
So many books. I
good.
have
Yeah.
Gabor Mate, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he's a psychiatrist, a medical doctor that I follow quite a bit. And I get a lot of information from him, kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Trauma.
And how it impacts
We
our
all have it.
brain. Yeah, and
Yep.
how we can develop resilience by being exposed to many traumas. And Kelly and I talk all the time. And Kelly and I moved around a lot, and no one in our parent was in the military.
Right.
And
That's right.
everyone's, "Oh, are you a military brat?" No,
No, we
no,
were
we are
not.
not.
Not at all. Yeah.
But looking back, obviously, Kelly and I are incredibly flexible people who can go with the flow, and we can meet and make friends like nothing because we were forced to do that. And so the flip is like joking, but I bought this house and someone's, "Oh, how do you live here?" And I was like, "I'm dying in this house. Like, I'm never moving ever again. And I want my kids to be in the same school and never ever experience
Right.
changing schools." But
Yep.
then obviously that is not going to develop a flexible, resilient child either.
Yeah. Perhaps there's many ways to get there, but I get
Yes, true.
the
Yeah.
sentiment. I think we just don't want that to happen. The things we've experienced.
Yeah.
We would
Yeah,
rather it not happen to our children.
Yeah.
absolutely.
We become the anti-parent. And one of the things we talked about at the beginning about your practice, and I would love to hear a little bit more just about the logistics of your practice and like who the population is that you see and the work that you're doing there?
Yeah, good question. So I'd say probably about it's just me and my practice. I'm the owner operator of the practice at this point, but I see probably 70, 80% children and adolescents, and then their parents, right? Because that's what I'm known for in Las Vegas. That's where a lot of my referrals come in that way. I've expanded. I've done some trainings and some different things in couples and griefs and different things. So I have other populations as well. Interestingly enough, I get a lot of middle-aged women that come my way. When I was talking to my wife the other day, I was like, I have no idea how I got that population.
Aren't they a
Uh,
joy to work with?
yes, yeah, it's good. So, yeah, I like the diversity as much as I love working with teens and kids and parents. I like to have a few outliers, kind of just differentiate the practice a bit. So, yeah, that's what we do. Yeah, very small. It's just me.
Yeah, it's just me, and I'm telling you that's the best way to be when people
Yeah,
are telling me I'm like, "Yeah, that's why I work by myself. I don't
yeah,
wanna work with anybody anymore."
right.
I become set in my
Well,
ways,
your
and I'm like, "Yeah."
field lends itself that you guys can be able to do that too, which is really great.
Yeah, yeah, or like, Braxton, you said you're still doing some work.
Yeah, I do some contract work with an agency, like 5 hours a week, not too much, but
Yeah.
it's great. So I have this podcast and then I'm going to go hang out with my kids and then I'll go to work a little later. And I love
Yeah.
working in this field. It's especially private practice. You can create your own schedule and do your own
Mhm.
thing. And it's awesome.
It's what's the point of having your own business if you don't get joy out of it? And I think that's something Kelly and I have talked about, just a balance. Like when I started and people were like, "Oh, I can only come at midnight." I'd be like, "Okay, I will see you at
Yeah.
midnight." It was like
I used to do
I
the same thing.
wanted to
Yeah.
build and I was just whatever and I was working weekends and then all of a sudden I was like, "What is happening?" And I changed my hours to be able to get my kids from school. So then I felt like I owed people more. So then I was working really early in the morning. And then I was like, "What am I doing? I can be available whenever I wanna be available." And, like, the other day, my son was sick and my mom is retired, and I was like, "I don't have to have my mom watch him. I can clear my schedule. What's the point of being in charge if we can't do that?" And so that's great. Now, Kelly, you run your own business, and it's really awesome to be able to do that and run your own schedule.
For
Yeah.
sure.
It's
And
hard. It's
hopefully
hard to think back about the 8 to 5 or 9 to 5
Mhm.
gig, right?
I
There's a lot more
tried.
options.
Yeah, I went for a minute because I was like, "I wanna work back in a nonprofit, and I wanna work with people, and I wanna," and then I did that, and I was like, "Oh, this is horrible." Yeah, I don't wanna do what you say when you say. I don't wanna go to meetings. I don't wanna
Hmm.
do all
Yeah.
of this.
I didn't care about PTO.
Yeah. Do you think or are there any other tips that we haven't gone over for our listeners and parenting teens or any strategies that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, I was thinking about just one more. I think I had two, but I can only remember one. But this idea of repairing, extremely difficult. And what I mean by repairing is saying sorry, making amends, right? I am surprised by how many kids come into my office and I say, what's going on? And they bring up something with their parents. I say, did you ever hear the other end of it? Did your parents ever make amends with you? And 9 times out of 10, they say no, right?
Hmm.
It's so powerful when we as parents can humble ourselves enough to say, you know what, I made a mistake and I want my kids to learn the importance of making amends. That's where that true connection and vulnerability comes from, right?
Yeah.
Is when we as parents can say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I behaved in a way that hurt you, right? I'm sorry that I had these big emotions and I didn't handle it like I teach you to do, right? I didn't live up to the expectation that I teach you guys as kids. That is so powerful. I see it with my kids all the time. I have younger kids, but now what I see is that me and my wife try to repair with our children, right? We have a 4-year old and we yell sometimes and we make mistakes and whatever. And when we make amends with him, then later on, the consequence of that is that when he does things to his sister, or he does things to friends, or he does things to us, he'll come over and say, hey, can I give you a hug? I'm sorry that I did that. And I think that's really powerful. It doesn't work all the time, right?
Yeah.
But the goal
Yeah.
is long term, not short term. But it's very hard, but probably the most rewarding thing. My wife is amazing at this. To say sorry, make amends.
Yeah. No, that's so true. That's something I always say, Kelly, can you imagine our dad, like, taking
Well,
responsibility?
he did though, Jess. That was the thing. It would be like, "I'm sorry I yelled," and it would just be like mad and unforgiving. But I do think as much as I feel like we did grow up in a way that most of the half the time
I'm gonna say
it was
no.
apology.
I don't think saying I'm sorry is making amends or taking responsibility. I think there's a way that you can say that. If you just say, I'm sorry, I don't know, those are just two words. But if you were like, you know what, I let my anger get the best of me. It's something that I'm really working on. I'm not happy with the way I behaved. I think that's very different. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I think that's different.
I was just going to follow up with that, Jessica.
Okay.
Kelly, I'd be curious. You said, I don't know if it really meant thing. I'd be curious about the quality of that relationship with your father and whether or not there was trust in the process, right? So in an ideal situation, me as a parent, when I say, I'm sorry, I'm trying to work on it, etc., my child knows that's true, right? It's not like I say that and then 5 seconds later, I'm smacking him,
You're doing it
right?
again,
Or it's every single time I'm trying to improve, right? My children see me take breaks. My children see me take the deep breaths. They see me using the skills that I know to calm myself down. That's a collaborative approach, right? Words mean, like you said, words mean very little, but it's the action that follows or precedes those words that are really important.
Yeah. And I
great
think
point.
I always tell my kids we're evolving. And it is what the cool thing is that my older two can tell me, we can have conversations and talk about it, and
Yeah.
they can tell me. I remember when I was at home and I wasn't taking care of myself very well. And so I don't think I was the best version of myself. And so we can talk about that. And I can say, oh, I used to never take care of myself. And now I go to the gym and I take time for myself. And that's so much better. We can't just always do for other, whatever, just like lessons. And we can have these conversations, more high level conversations, and talk about it. And this Gen Z is giving me like minute by minute feedback on my parenting.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
I
because they
look at
have
the
access
feedback.
to it, right? It's
That's
interesting.
true.
They can go on TikTok and there's a bunch of experts there, right? No licensure,
Yeah.
no nothing, but there's a lot of experts. I see a lot of teenagers come into session and say, I heard this on TikTok. I'll say, that's great that you heard that on TikTok from a random person, right? But
Yeah.
uh, that, again, they don't need the information. They have it, right? They'll give us feedback. They know what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. This was so great. This
Yeah,
was
very
awesome.
helpful.
I definitely I think I need to get the workbook and do some more work as a parent. If you're losing it, it's not your kid, right? That's you. That's the work you need to do. And we don't want to hear that, right? We want to hear these are the 5 things you can do to make a better teen. And what you're saying is you've got to do the work. You've got to notice your triggers, and you've got to be in a spot when something happens, you're not so reactionary, but that you can ask questions and connect with your child first before you can move forward and make change. That's what I'm hearing.
100%. I agree with you.
This was
That's
awesome.
awesome. Thanks for listening today. Don't forget to subscribe so you can hear our latest episodes as soon as they drop.
If you love today's episode, please share with another mom.
And while you're there, it would be great if you gave us a 5-star rating and review. We'd love to hear from you.
If you want to know more about Kelly and I, want to find more of our blogs, tips, tools, resources, check that out at chasingbrighter.com, or we interact with you on Instagram and Facebook at Chasing Brighter. Thanks. We'll be here next week.